content. Tonight I have a special story for you about the Axeman of New Orleans. The Axeman of New Orleans was an unidentified American serial killer who was active in and around New Orleans, Louisiana between May of 1918 and October of 1919. The attacker was never identified, and the murders remain unsolved. If ever a story should start with, "It was a dark and stormy night," this would be the one. As the name implies, the victims of this ghastly ghoul were usually always attacked with an axe, which often belonged to the victims themselves. In most cases, I'll bring up, the panel on the back door of a home was removed by a chisel. Usually the chisel and the panel was left on the floor next to the door. The killer then attacked the inhabitants with either an axe and sometimes a straight razor. Surprisingly, the crimes were not motivated by robbery, and the perpetrator never removed items from the victims' homes, not even a trophy. The majority of the Axeman's victims were Italian immigrants and Italian Americans. Many media outlets sensationalized this detail, all the way down to suggesting it was a secret mafia involvement, even though there was absolutely no evidence of a connection. Some crime experts have suggested that these killings were sexually motivated, and that the murderer was perhaps a sadist, wanting specifically female victims. It's been hypothesized that the Axeman killed male victims only when they obstructed his attempts to murder women. This tends to have a bit of credibility to it, because there are instances when the women of the household were murdered, but not the man. A much less plausible theory is that the Axeman committed the murders in an attempt to promote jazz music. This theory was born of a written correspondence supposedly written by the killer. In the letter, the author stated that he would spare the lives of those who played jazz in their homes. There are even some jazz clubs in New Orleans today that claim the Axeman haunts their grounds, and they make a fortune off of the ghost tours. But who were the victims? On May 23rd of 1918, Joseph Maggio, an Italian grocer, and his wife Catherine were attacked while sleeping inside of their apartment on the corner of Upper Line and Magnolia Streets in New Orleans. The killer broke into the residence and cut the couple's throats with a straight razor. Catherine's throat was cut so deeply, her head was nearly severed from her shoulders. The killer then attacked both victims with an axe. It's speculated that he did this to conceal the cause of death. Joseph survived the initial attack, but he died within minutes after being discovered by his brothers. The killer wrote a message on a nearby pavement reading, "Miss Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony." This was theorized to be a reference to the Anthony and Joanna Scambria Italian grocers who were attacked, Joanna fatally, 7 years earlier in 1911. Police found the bloody clothes of the killer in the apartment. He had had the gall to change into a clean set of this other man's clothes before making his getaway. Forensics in 1918 almost didn't exist, and was at the very least in its infancy, so a complete search of the premises was not performed after the bodies were removed. The blood-stained razor was later found on the lawn of a neighboring property. Police ruled out robbery as a motivation for the attacks, as money and valuables left in plain sight were not stolen by the intruder. The razor was found to belong to Joseph's brother Andrew, who owned a barber shop on Camp Street. His employee, Esteban Torres, told police that Andrew had removed the razor from his shop 2 days prior to the murder, explaining that he had wanted to have a chip in the blade removed. Andrew, who lived in an adjoining apartment, reported hearing groaning noises through the wall on the night of the murders, but he blamed his failure to hear any noise related to the attack itself on his habit of drinking to excess. But the police were surprised that he failed to hear the intruder's forced entry into the home, even if he was inebriated. Andrew became the police chief's prime suspect in the crime at first. He was later released after investigators were unable to break down his statement. But there was also his account of having seen an unknown man supposedly lurking near the apartment prior to the murders. A little over a month later, during the early morning hours of June 27, 1918, Louis Bessemer and his mistress Harriet Lowe were attacked in private quarters at the back of Bessemer's grocery. Bessemer was struck with a hatchet above his right temple. It's just a guess now that it caused a skull fracture, because again, forensics really wasn't that much of a thing yet. Harriet Lowe was attacked over her left ear and left with one side of her face permanently paralyzed. The couple were discovered the following morning alive, but critically injured. They were discovered by the bakery wagon driver who had come to the grocery store for his routine delivery. The axe, which had belonged to Bessemer himself, was found in their bathroom. Bessemer stated to investigators that he had been sleeping when he was attacked by the hatchet. Almost immediately, police arrested a 41-year-old black man who had previously been employed at the groceries just a week before the attacks. But there was no evidence that he was guilty. The police arrested him anyway because he had offered conflicting accounts of his whereabouts on the morning of the attack. He was, of course, later released because police didn't have enough or any evidence to hold him. Harriet later recalled her assailant having been of mixed race, but her statement was discounted by police due to her obviously disoriented state. Robbery was said to be the only possible explanation for this attack, but no money or valuables were taken. Harriet became the center of a media frenzy when she continually made outrageous and often false statements relating to both the attack and the character of her lover, Mr. Bessemer. After Bessemer was suspected of espionage following the discovery of foreign written letters in his possession, Harriet told police that she thought he was a German spy, resulting in his immediate arrest. So World War I was happening at this time. World War I was from July 1914 to November of 1918, and this was in June of 1918. So not only was there a lot of German hatred on the rise, but this woman wanted her 15 minutes of fame. Bessemer was released 2 days later, but in August of 1918, he was arrested again after Harriet, by then on her deathbed following a failed surgery, named him as her attacker. This poor guy was charged with murder and served 9 months in prison before being acquitted on May 1st of 1919 after a 10-minute jury deliberation. But can we really blame Harriet? Obviously, there was a lot of brain damage going on. A little over a month after Harriet and Louis Bessemer's attack, in the early morning hours of August 5th of 1918, a pregnant 28-year-old woman named Anna Schneider woke up to find a dark figure standing over her. She was bashed in the face repeatedly, her scalp was cut open, and her face was covered in blood. Anna was discovered after midnight by her husband Ed when he returned home from work. Anna said that she remembered nothing of the attack and gave birth to a healthy baby girl just 2 days later. Ed told the police that nothing was stolen from the home besides $6 or $7 that had been sitting in his wallet. The windows and the doors of the couple's apartment didn't look like they'd been forced open, and authorities decided that Anna Schneider was most likely attacked with a lamp that had been on the nearby table. A man by the name of James Gleason, who police said was an ex-convict, was arrested shortly after Anna was found. He was later released due to lack of evidence. Lead investigators began to publicly wonder if the attacks were related to the previous 2 attacks. On August 10th, 1918, Pauline and Mary Bruno awoke to the sound of commotion in the adjoining room where their elderly uncle Joseph Romano slept. Upon entering the room, the sisters discovered that Joseph had taken a serious blow to his head that resulted in two obvious open cuts. The attacker was running away just as they arrived, but the girls were able to see that he was a dark-skinned, heavy-set man who wore a dark suit and a slouched hat. Joseph was able to walk to the ambulance once it arrived, but died 2 days later from severe head trauma. His home had been ransacked, but nothing was stolen. Authorities found a bloody axe in the backyard and discovered that a panel on the back door had been chiseled away. Joseph's murder stirred a state of extreme chaos in New Orleans, with residents living in constant fear of an Axeman attack. Police received a slew of reports from citizens who claimed to have seen the killer lurking in local neighborhoods. A few men even called in to report that they had found axes in their backyards. John D'Antonio, a retired Italian detective, made public statements where he guessed that the man who had committed the recent murders was the same man who had killed several individuals back in 1911. I'll talk more about that when I cover the case of Clementine Barnabet in the future. The detective described the potential killer as, quote, an individual of dual personalities who killed without motive. This type of individual, he said, could very likely have been a normal, law-abiding citizen who was often overcome by an overwhelming desire to kill. He later went on to describe the killer as a real-life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I have a cat like that, honest. On the night of March 10, 1919, Italian immigrant Charles Cordomiglia and his wife Rosie and their infant daughter Mary were all attacked in their residence located in a New Orleans suburb. Upon hearing the screams from the Cordomiglia residents, another grocer by the name of Giordano rushed across the street to check it out. He discovered that Cordomiglia's family had all been attacked by the Axeman. Charles and Rosie had both suffered skull fractures from blows caused by an axe, which was found on their back porch. Little baby Mary was killed in her mother's arms from a blow to the back of the neck. Nothing was stolen from the house, but a panel to the back door had been chiseled away. By some miracle, Charles and Rosie both survived. Charles was released 2 days after the attack, while his wife remained in the care of the doctors. When Rosie woke up, she made claims that the Giordanos had done this. Mr. Giordano himself and his 18-year-old son Frank were surely responsible for the attacks. Giordano was a 69-year-old man who was in too poor of health to have been able to do something like this. Frank was more than 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds and would have been far too large to have fit through the panel in the back door. Charles denied his wife's claims, but the police arrested them both anyway and charged them with murder. The two men later would be found guilty. Frank was sentenced to hang, and his father was sentenced to life in prison. Charles was so angry at what his wife had done that he divorced Rosie after the trial. Almost a year later, she finally admitted that she had falsely accused the men out of jealousy and spite, and both of them were released. Thank goodness. On March 13th of 1919, a letter purporting to be from the Axeman was published in newspapers, saying that he would kill again at 15 minutes past midnight on the night of March 19th, but he would spare the occupants of any place where jazz bands were playing. That night, all of the city's dance halls were filled to capacity, and professional amateur bands played at jazz parties at hundreds of houses around town. There were no murders that night, but the legitimacy of the letter's origin has never been proven. Stick around to the end, and I'll even read the letter. On August 10th of 1919, a grocer named Steve Boca was attacked as he slept in his bedroom. The attacker was an axe-wielding maniac. Steve awoke during the night to find a dark figure looming over his bed. He was hit so hard he lost consciousness. But once he woke up, Steve ran into the street to investigate. That was when he found that his head had been cracked open. He then ran to the home of his neighbor Frank, where he lost consciousness and collapsed. Nothing had been taken from the home, but a panel on the back door of the home had been chiseled away. Steve recovered from his injuries, but could not remember any details of the attack. On the night of September 3rd, 1919, Sarah Lauman was attacked in her apartment. Neighbors had come to check on the young woman who lived alone and broke into the home when she didn't answer their knocking. They found the young 19-year-old lying unconscious on her bed. She had a severe head injury and was missing several teeth. The intruder had entered the apartment through an open window and attacked Lauman with a blunt object. A bloody axe was discovered on the front lawn of the building. Lauman recovered from her injuries, but she couldn't recall any details from the attack, and nothing was taken from her home. On the night of October 27th of 1919, the wife of a man named Mike Pepitone was woken up by the noise and arrived at the door of her husband's bedroom just as a large axe-wielding man was running off. Her husband had been struck in the head and was covered in his own blood. Blood spatter covered the majority of the room. Mike's wife was unable to describe any characteristics of the killer other than large. But she was the mother of 6 children, so it's often speculated that she refused to give any further description for fear that the Axeman might come back and take out revenge on her kids. The Mike Pepitone murder was the last of the alleged Axeman attacks. The Axeman was never caught or identified, and his crime spree stopped as mysteriously as it had started. The murderer's identity remains unknown. Now to that letter. In March of 1919, the New Orleans-based Times newspaper received a taunting letter from the supposed Axeman. He revealed his love of jazz music and propositioned the citizens of New Orleans to jazz it in their homes the eve of St. Joseph's Day, which was a major holiday for Italians, or get the axe. The letter reads, Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal of New Orleans, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible. Even as the ether that surrounds your earth, I am not a human being, but a spirit, a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleans and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone knew whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way that they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am. For it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there's any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleans think of me as most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, and the worst, for I am in close relationship with the Angel of Death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time on next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans in my infinite mercy. I'm going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time that I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fantasy. Signed, the Axeman.
If you're a fan of dark history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.